Now let's look at the integration test cases. So as part of the integration test cases, we need a server to be running, like we are submitting the request to a live server, but it is running from our project itself. As part of the unit testing, we are loading the controller under respective dependencies. And if there are any dependencies, we are going to mark them using Marketo framework, which is already part of our libraries. In case of the integration test cases, we don't need to mark it because the entire server is going to be up and it's going to be evaluated like we are submitting the request from any of the clients such as Postman or Call or any other. So what we are going to do is here, we are going to capture the server port. We can fix the server port or we can take the random one, but we strongly suggest to take the random one and capture the random port for which the application is running on. Use the test REST template to send the request to the API and later validate the response. Instead of creating the integration test cases along with the unit test cases, I strongly recommend to create another test folder, let's say integration test cases or integration test, and then create the files or create the unit test cases in that folder. So first of all, we are going to see how we are going to add additional test folder to the Eclipse project. Go to the test and create a folder, integration_test. Integration test folder has been created. Now let's add it into a configure build path as a test. So let's go to the configuration and go to the source. As part of the source, we need to add our test. Let's close all of them and let's add a folder. And in this case, integration test. Say OK. And here, change this one to a test folder and change the default path. Double click on it and we are going to specify that to a target test classes and apply it and close. Now this become our test. So now let's create a package. Package has been created and now we are going to create integration test case for welcome controller. So we are going to write the integration test cases by API. Instead of combining all of them into one, we are going to create each API has its own. So in our case, welcome controller integration test case. So let's create a class welcome controller underscore intg test. Now this one is going to be Spring Boot test case. So we are going to write Spring Boot test and we are going to use web environment. As part of the web environment, we are going to use instead of the defined port, we are going to use the random port. So while running this test case, the Spring Boot project will be started on a random port, which means any available port, and it will be released later. Why are we using the random port? Because when parallel test cases are running, random port would help us not to run into port clashes. Now let's capture the port that it is running on. So we need to use annotation local server port. And what exactly it does, it is going to identify the port that this Spring Boot project is running on and it's assigned to the port variable. Now let's write for the simple one, which is a welcome. So for this one, how we are going to write it? Let's write the test case. So our path is this one, API path. Now we need to submit it, the request. As I mentioned earlier, the server will be running. So we are going to send a request through REST template. In this case, test REST template. And auto write it. Now as part of the test REST template dot get, because here I know that I'm getting a string, so I will be using API path and I know I'm getting the string class. So let's capture the output response. So we got the response entity. We are going to evaluate using asset equals response dot get start code, and here HTTP status dot OK. And along with that, we are going to asset equals and the response body, which is nothing but our response, which is coming from the API, is going to be welcome user. So let's format the code. I formatted the code. And remember this, the integration test cases would take more time than the unit test cases, because here the whole server will be starting. As this is a simple project, it would take less time. So, but in the real projects, we might see a significant difference. Now, as part of the API path, we need to compose the host also. So in this case, the server is running on local machine. So our host is localhost. So the API would be string.format http : %. This is for the host and this is for the port and this is for the actual API that we are expecting. So first let's put the host, port, and then the API. Save all of them, format it, and let's run the unit test case. And the whole server has been started. If you see it, whole server has been started. You can see the log that Tomcat server has been started on it 5291, and the test case is been passed. That means we are getting welcome user as we expected. Now let's write the test cases for other one where we are going to send user information. So let's copy paste the same. Now we are going to say welcome user, and as part of the API we are passing the user. Now for this one we need to send as a request parameter or the query parameter. So we are going to create username is equals to Ranga, and the expected output would be Ranga 3 exclamatory marks. Save the file and run the test cases. And the server has been started and both the test cases will be performed at the same time. And it seems to be welcome user. I have given the wrong path, so I'm correcting the path. So user, and rerun the test case. Now all the test cases has been passed, including the latest one. So let's create for the path variable as well. So in the path variable, we are sending the user ID. So let's copy paste the same. So user ID, and here I'm passing user ID here, and I'm expecting user ID and 3 exclamatory marks. So let's copy the same. It's been updated. Let's rerun the test cases. Server is being started. Server has started. Now all the test cases would be performed. User ID has been passed. Now let's look at the other one, which is calling a post API, where we need to send user details and we will be expecting user details. So maximize. Okay, and here save user, and I'm going to say created. So for this one, so the API is user, so the user, and we need to have the user object. So let's copy the user details from our unit test cases. Now I created the user object. Now I'm going to perform rest template dot, and as this is a post one, we need to send using exchange. So as part of the exchange, I need to pass the URL, the API path. I'm sending the API path, and I need to set the HTTP method. So let's call HTTP method and request entity. In that case, HTTP, let's say here is a method and this one is entity, and the response type which I'm expecting is user details. So user detail dot class. Let's create the method. This is HTTP method dot post. I got the post method, and I need to create an entity. So let's create an entity also. So as part of the entity, we are going to send the payload. So in this case, user details. So in the entity, I'm going to set user details, and this entity will be sent. So here we are expecting a response. So as I mentioned earlier, we are going to evaluate response status, but here the response status would be created. We don't need object mapper. This change type to. I deliberately kept it as separate variable, but we can make them into inline also. So if we need to make the inline, okay, HTTP post has gone, and let's keep the entity as a separate, same entity as a separate, and user details and created. So when we send it, the expectation is our response body, in our case user details, will have a user ID. Get user ID is not null. So let's assert it as asset not null. Run the test case. Server is being started, and all test case has been passed along with the save user created. Let's create for other scenarios, which is if username is passed, we are expecting bad request. So bad request, and we are not passing the username, and we are expecting this, and there is no body. Save and rerun the test cases. Server is started. All test has been passed. Now let's write for the update user. So here we are going to pass the user ID as a path variable and request body. What we are expecting is, we are expecting user ID is been set, and other cases, if username is null, then we are returning back request. So let's make the changes. I'm copy pasting the same. So here update user, and we're expecting accepted here. So here we'll be passing 1001, and here accepted, and this time asset equals response body.get user ID is whatever the value that we are passing, that is 1001. So here update user and at the user ID. Now we need to change the method. So here we are sending put. So let's update it to the put. Save all the files and run the test cases. All tests has been passed, including latest one for update user, accepted, and bad request. The next one is delete mapping. Let's create for this one as well. So delete user, accepted, and this time we are going to pass delete, but this time there are no user details. Okay, in the entity, I don't need to send the entity, so remove the entity and we'll be passing as null, and the expectation is a string which we are expecting, so update it to the string, and here we are accepted, and let's write the asset equals as well. So as part of the asset equals, the body is a string itself. So the output would be deleted user ID and the user. So here the user ID, and we are passing 1001 as user ID. So this would be the user ID. Now let's run the unit test cases. Server has started and unit test case has been passed. Now let's finish for the rest of them as well. So as part of the latest JDK versions, the patch HTTP method has been taken out. Because of that reason, we cannot write the integration test case for this one. Even though we write it, we will get an invalid method exception. Why I have covered the patch? Because few scenarios, few places, the patch is still being used, such as older projects. So that's the reason I have covered the patch as well. But the patch has been taken out from the latest JDKs. So this concludes our integration test cases.